Hello, everyone, and welcome to English Learning Conversations. I'm Aurora, and today we have a very special episode designed specifically for intermediate English learners who are ready to push their skills to the next level. I'm here with Benjamin, who has been teaching intermediate English for over 20 years and has developed unique methods for helping students break through the intermediate plateau. Benjamin, please introduce yourself and tell us about your experience with intermediate learners.
Thank you, Aurora. It's wonderful to be here today. I'm Benjamin, originally from Scotland, and I've dedicated my career to helping intermediate English learners overcome what I call the intermediate trap, that frustrating period where you understand a lot but still struggle with natural conversations and complex listening situations. I've worked with thousands of students from around the world, and I've noticed that intermediate learners face very specific challenges that require targeted practice methods. Today, I want to share advanced listening and speaking techniques that will help your intermediate listeners develop the confidence and skills they need to reach an advanced level.
That's exactly what our intermediate listeners need to hear. The intermediate level can be particularly frustrating because students often feel like they should be more fluent than they actually are. Benjamin, what makes intermediate listening and speaking different from beginner practice?
Excellent question, Aurora. Intermediate learners have mastered basic grammar structures and vocabulary, but they're now encountering the complexity of real-world English communication. At this level, you're not just learning individual words or simple sentence patterns anymore. You're dealing with nuanced meanings, cultural implications, humor, sarcasm, and the messy reality of how native speakers actually communicate. Intermediate listening requires understanding not just what people say, but what they mean, what they imply, and what they leave unsaid. Speaking at this level requires expressing complex thoughts, managing longer conversations, and using language strategically for different purposes and audiences.
That's a perfect explanation of why intermediate can feel so challenging. Let's start with listening skills. What specific listening challenges do intermediate learners face that beginners don't encounter?
Intermediate listening challenges are quite sophisticated. First, there's the issue of inference and implication. Native speakers often communicate indirectly, and intermediate learners must learn to read between the lines. When someone says, "It's getting late," they might actually mean, "I want to leave now." Second, there's the challenge of following complex discussions with multiple participants, topic changes, and interruptions. Third, intermediate learners encounter more varied accents, speaking speeds, and casual speech patterns. Fourth, they must process abstract concepts, hypothetical situations, and nuanced opinions rather than just concrete, factual information. Finally, they're expected to understand humor, idioms, and cultural references that add layers of meaning to conversations.
Those challenges really highlight the complexity of natural English communication. What specific techniques do you recommend for developing these advanced listening skills?
I've developed what I call the layered comprehension method for intermediate listening practice. This involves listening to the same content multiple times with different objectives. First, listen for the main topic and overall tone. Are speakers agreeing, disagreeing, being serious, or joking? Second, listen for specific details and supporting information. Third, listen for the speaker's attitudes, emotions, and relationships with each other. Fourth, listen for implied meanings, cultural references, and unstated assumptions. This layered approach trains your brain to process multiple levels of meaning simultaneously, which is essential for advanced comprehension.
That layered approach sounds very comprehensive. Can you give us a practical example of how this would work with real content?
Absolutely. Let's imagine you're listening to a podcast discussion about remote work. On your first listen, you might identify that three speakers are discussing the advantages and disadvantages of working from home, and the overall tone is balanced but slightly critical. On your second listen, you focus on specific points. One speaker mentions productivity studies, another discusses social isolation, and the third talks about company culture. On your third listen, you notice that the first speaker sounds skeptical about remote work despite presenting both sides. The second speaker seems to speak from personal experience, and the third speaker represents a management perspective. On your fourth listen, you pick up on cultural assumptions about work-life balance, implied criticism of traditional office environments, and subtle references to recent economic changes that influenced remote work adoption.
That's a brilliant way to develop deeper listening comprehension. Now let's talk about speaking practice for intermediate learners. What makes intermediate speaking different from beginner speaking practice?
Intermediate speaking is about developing fluency, nuance, and adaptability rather than just accuracy. At this level, learners need to practice expressing complex ideas coherently, managing longer speaking turns, adapting their language for different audiences and purposes, and participating naturally in dynamic conversations. Intermediate speakers should be able to tell detailed stories, explain abstract concepts, express and support opinions, negotiate and persuade, handle interruptions and topic changes, and use appropriate register for different situations. The focus shifts from, can I make myself understood, to, can I communicate effectively and appropriately?
Those are much more sophisticated speaking goals. What specific practice techniques help intermediate learners develop these advanced speaking skills?
I recommend several targeted practice methods. First, extended monologue practice. Choose a topic and speak about it for 3 to 5 minutes without stopping, developing your ability to organize thoughts and maintain fluency over longer periods. Second, perspective-taking exercises. Practice arguing different sides of the same issue to develop flexibility and critical thinking skills. Third, register adaptation practice. Explain the same concept to different audiences, like explaining a technical process to both experts and children. Fourth, conversation management practice. Learn to ask follow-up questions, redirect conversations, and handle interruptions gracefully. Fifth, storytelling with purpose. Practice telling the same story for different purposes, like entertaining friends versus giving a professional example.
These practice methods sound very practical for real-world communication. Benjamin, how important is pronunciation and intonation at the intermediate level?
Pronunciation and intonation become crucial at the intermediate level, but in a different way than for beginners. Intermediate learners usually have understandable pronunciation, but they need to work on the subtle aspects that convey meaning and attitude. Sentence stress and rhythm are essential for sounding natural and being easily understood. Intonation patterns help express emotions, indicate questions versus statements, and show agreement or disagreement. Intermediate learners should also work on connected speech, how words blend together in natural conversation. The goal isn't perfection, but rather developing pronunciation that supports clear communication and doesn't distract from your message.
That makes sense. It's about refinement rather than just basic clarity. What role does vocabulary play in intermediate listening and speaking development?
Vocabulary at the intermediate level is about depth and flexibility rather than just breadth. Intermediate learners need to understand that many English words have multiple meanings depending on context, and they need to recognize these nuances in listening and use them appropriately in speaking. They should focus on learning word families, collocations, and phrasal expressions rather than just individual words. For listening, this means recognizing when familiar words are used in unfamiliar ways. For speaking, this means using vocabulary precisely and naturally, rather than just finding words that convey basic meaning. Advanced vocabulary knowledge also includes understanding register, knowing which words are formal, informal, technical, or casual.
That vocabulary depth really does add sophistication to communication. Benjamin, what about cultural competence? How important is cultural knowledge for intermediate English users?
Cultural competence becomes absolutely essential at the intermediate level. Much of advanced English communication involves cultural references, shared assumptions, and implicit knowledge that goes beyond grammar and vocabulary. Intermediate learners need to understand concepts like indirect communication styles, appropriate levels of formality, humor, and sarcasm conventions, and social taboos. This cultural knowledge dramatically improves both listening comprehension and speaking effectiveness. Without it, intermediate learners might understand the words but miss the real message, or they might communicate accurately but inappropriately for the cultural context.
Cultural understanding really does add that crucial layer of meaning. Let's talk about specific practice activities. What listening exercises do you recommend for intermediate learners?
I recommend several progressive listening activities. Start with podcast discussions on topics you're familiar with, gradually moving to unfamiliar subjects. Practice with different English varieties: British, American, Australian, and international English accents. Use authentic materials like TED Talks, news interviews, and radio call-in shows rather than materials designed for language learners. Practice note-taking while listening to develop the skill of processing and organizing information simultaneously. Work with video content where you can observe body language and context clues. Most importantly, practice with spontaneous, unscripted speech rather than just prepared presentations or readings.
Those activities sound like they would provide excellent real world preparation. What about speaking activities specifically designed for intermediate learners?
For speaking practice, I recommend activities that simulate real communication needs. Practice impromptu speaking, choose random topics, and speak for 2 minutes without preparation to develop fluency under pressure. Role-play complex scenarios like job interviews, customer complaints, or academic discussions that require appropriate register and strategic communication. Practice presentation skills with topics that require you to explain, persuade, or analyze rather than just describe. Engage in debate activities where you must listen to others' points, respond appropriately, and build arguments. Record yourself regularly and analyze not just accuracy, but also fluency, naturalness, and effectiveness of communication.
Recording yourself is such valuable feedback. Benjamin, how can intermediate learners work on understanding and using humor, sarcasm, and other subtle communication styles?
Understanding and using subtle communication styles requires exposure to authentic social interactions. Watch comedy shows, listen to podcasts with banter between hosts, and observe how native speakers use tone, timing, and context to convey humor or sarcasm. Pay attention to the gap between literal meaning and intended meaning. For practice, try responding to the same situation with different levels of directness. Practice being diplomatic, assertive, sarcastic, and humorous. Learn common patterns for indirect communication like, "I was wondering if," for polite requests or "don't you think?" For subtle suggestions. Remember that humor and sarcasm are culturally specific, so learn the conventions of the English-speaking culture you're most interested in.
Those are sophisticated communication skills that really mark advanced English use. What about handling challenging listening situations like fast speech, multiple speakers, or noisy environments?
Challenging listening situations require specific preparation and strategies. For fast speech, practice with gradually increasing speeds and learn to focus on stressed words rather than trying to catch every syllable. For multiple speakers, watch panel discussions or group conversations and practice following different voices, noting how speakers signal when they want to speak and how they respond to each other. For noisy environments, practice listening with background noise and learn to use context clues when you miss specific words. Develop your ability to ask for clarification politely. Phrases like, "I'm sorry I didn't catch that," or "Could you repeat the last part?" are essential skills for real-world communication.
Those strategies would definitely help in real world situations. Benjamin, how can intermediate learners practice the kind of complex speaking they'll need for academic or professional environments?
Academic and professional speaking requires specific practice with formal registers and structured communication. Practice giving presentations with clear introductions, main points, and conclusions. Work on explaining complex processes step by step with appropriate transition words. Practice summarizing and paraphrasing other people's ideas accurately. Learn to ask sophisticated questions and provide detailed responses. Practice diplomatic language for disagreeing or providing criticism. Work on spontaneous speaking in formal contexts. Practice responding to unexpected questions in professional scenarios. Most importantly, learn to organize your thoughts quickly and present them coherently under pressure.
Those skills are certainly essential for advanced English use. What mistakes do you see intermediate learners making that actually hold back their progress?
Several common mistakes limit intermediate learners' progress. First, over-relying on perfect grammar instead of focusing on effective communication. Intermediate learners often sacrifice fluency for accuracy when they should be balancing both. Second, avoiding challenging content because it's difficult. Growth happens at the edge of your comfort zone. Third, practicing only with other non-native speakers instead of seeking exposure to native speaker interactions. Fourth, focusing too much on formal English and not enough on casual conversational English. Fifth, not developing listening stamina. Real conversations and presentations can last much longer than the short audio clips in textbooks. Finally, being afraid to make mistakes when experimenting with more advanced language features.
Those are important insights about moving beyond intermediate level habits. How can learners assess whether they're ready to transition from intermediate to advanced practice?
Several indicators suggest readiness for advanced practice. You can follow most conversations between native speakers about familiar topics without extreme concentration. You can express complex ideas and opinions with reasonable fluency, even if not perfectly. You understand most movies and TV shows with minimal use of subtitles. You can participate in group discussions and contribute meaningfully to conversations. You understand humor, sarcasm, and implied meanings in most contexts. You can adapt your speaking style for different audiences and purposes. You're comfortable with some uncertainty in conversations and don't panic when you encounter unfamiliar expressions. If you recognize these capabilities in yourself, you're ready for advanced level challenges.
Those are excellent benchmarks for self-assessment. Benjamin, what's your most important advice for intermediate learners who want to break through to advanced proficiency?
My most important advice is to embrace complexity and ambiguity rather than avoiding it. Intermediate learners often want clear rules and predictable patterns, but advanced English is messy, contextual, and culturally nuanced. Seek out challenging content that pushes your limits. Engage with authentic materials rather than simplified educational content. Practice in real-world situations where communication matters, not just classroom exercises. Focus on developing your ability to manage communication strategically. Learn to navigate conversations, influence outcomes, and build relationships through language. Most importantly, be patient with the process. The intermediate to advanced transition takes time because you're not just learning new rules, you're developing sophisticated cultural and linguistic intuitions.
That's such valuable advice about embracing the complexity of real English. Benjamin, thank you so much for sharing these advanced techniques for intermediate listening and speaking practice. I think our intermediate listeners now have a clear roadmap for pushing their skills to the next level.
Thank you, Aurora. It's been a pleasure discussing these advanced techniques. I hope intermediate learners feel inspired to challenge themselves with more sophisticated English practice. Remember, intermediate level is not a limitation. It's a launching pad for advanced proficiency. You have the foundation you need. Now it's time to build the sophisticated communication skills that will serve you in academic, professional, and social contexts throughout your life.
And thank you to all our intermediate listeners. Remember, you've already accomplished something remarkable by reaching intermediate proficiency. Now it's time to push beyond your comfort zone and develop the nuanced communication skills that will truly set you apart. The techniques Benjamin shared today will help you navigate the complexity of real English communication with confidence and skill.
Exactly. Intermediate learners have tremendous potential. Don't underestimate your abilities, but also don't underestimate the work required to reach advanced proficiency. Every challenging conversation, every complex podcast, every sophisticated text you engage with is building your advanced English competence. Trust the process and enjoy the journey.
Until next time, this is Aurora from English Learning Conversations. Keep challenging yourself, keep pushing your boundaries, and remember that advanced proficiency is within your reach. Your intermediate skills are the foundation for the sophisticated English communication you're developing every day. Goodbye, everyone.
Farewell, and may your English conversations become increasingly rich, nuanced, and rewarding.